May 24, 1940. Hitler's field headquarters, Charleville, northern France. The morning situation map showed German armour 18 kilometres from Dunkirk harbour. Over 330,000 Allied troops trapped between the coast and Panzer divisions. Army Group A reported the encirclement complete. Luftwaffe reconnaissance confirmed British columns jamming every road to the beaches. Wehrmacht officers expected final annihilation within 48 hours. Then, at 12:30 p.m, a typed directive arrived from Berlin. Armoured forces are to hold present positions. For 2 full days, the most advanced mechanized army in the world stood motionless, while British destroyers and fishing boats crossed the channel. By the time the halt order lifted, evacuation ships lined the horizon. The question that haunts military history began that afternoon. Why did Germany stop at the moment of total victory? At 05:35 on May 10, 1940, the thunder of artillery announced full Gelb, case yellow. Along a 200-kilometre front from the North Sea to the Maginot Line, 136 German divisions surged westward. 10 Panzer divisions spearheaded the assault, carrying 2,500 tanks into Belgium and France. The Allies anticipated the main thrust through Belgium, just as in 1914. They moved their best divisions north to meet it, but the real blow fell 70 kilometres south, where the Ardennes forest met the Meuse River. Allied intelligence had dismissed the Ardennes as impassable to armour, too narrow, too forested, too hilly for mass mechanized movement. German planners under Generalleutnant Erich von Manstein calculated differently. They saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity, an undefended gap. On the morning of May 10th, a column of vehicles stretched 50 kilometres through the Ardennes. Motorcycles led the way, followed by Panzer Mark III's and Mark IV's, their 37mm and short-barreled 75-metre guns pointed west. Behind them came trucks loaded with infantry, engineers with bridging equipment, and supply wagons hauling fuel and ammunition. The forest roads, narrow as they were, carried the weight. By evening of May 12th, advance reconnaissance units reached the Meuse near Sedan. The river ran 60 metres wide, its banks steep and defended by French Second Army. Concrete bunkers lined the western shore, manned by reserve divisions equipped with 75mm guns and machine guns. French doctrine assumed the river line would hold for at least 9 days, enough time to move reserves into position. At dawn on May 13th, General Oberst Heinz Guderian's 99th Panzer Corps began crossing. The assault opened with concentrated air attack. Over 1,000 aircraft from Flieger Corps 8, Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, Heinkel He-111 medium bombers, and Dornier Du-17 fast bombers hammered French artillery positions. The Stukas descended in screaming dives, sirens wailing, releasing 250-kilogram bombs directly onto gun emplacements. For 8 hours the bombardment continued, methodical and unrelenting. Under this umbrella, German engineers launched rubber boats. The first wave carried assault infantry armed with MP-40 submachine guns and stick grenades. They crossed under fire, scrambled up the western bank and established footholds. By afternoon, pontoon bridges spanned the river. Panzer Mark III's rolled across, their tracks clattering on wooden planks. By midnight, 70 tanks held the western shore. The French Second Army disintegrated. Reserve units pounded from the air and outflanked by armour retreated in disorder. By May 15th, Guderian's corps had penetrated 40 kilometres beyond Sedan, advancing faster than even German planners had anticipated. OKH, Oberkommando des Heeres, the Army High Command, recorded in its situation report, "Breakthrough complete. Enemy reserves cannot close the gap." The Panzer corridor drove west at speeds exceeding 30 kilometres per day. Behind the armour came infantry divisions on foot, marching to consolidate the breakthrough. Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographed French columns retreating southward, away from the advancing Germans. The road to the English Channel lay open. By May 20th, forward elements of 2nd Panzer Division reached Abbeville on the Somme estuary. Tank crews radioed headquarters, "Wir sehen das Meer," we see the sea. In 10 days, the Wehrmacht had cut Allied forces in two. 7 French armies, the entire British Expeditionary Force and Belgian divisions were isolated in a pocket stretching from Lille to Dunkirk. The German official history later noted the achievement. In less than 2 weeks, the campaign plan designed for 6 weeks had been executed. The breakthrough at Sedan, deemed impossible by French doctrine, had shattered the Allied defence. The encirclement was complete. The pocket took shape with geometric precision. From Abbeville, German armour turned north toward Boulogne and Calais, sealing the Channel coast. From the east, infantry divisions advanced through Belgium, compressing the Allied perimeter. By May 21st, the British Expeditionary Forces supply lines to southern France were severed. Retreat routes narrowed to a single corridor, the road to Dunkirk. On May 21st, British forces attempted a counterattack at Arras. 2 tank battalions, 74 Matilda Mark I and Mark II infantry tanks, supported by infantry brigades, struck south against the 7th Panzer Division, commanded by General Major Erwin Rommel. The Matildas, heavily armoured for their era, proved nearly impervious to German 37mm anti-tank guns. Shells bounced off their thick frontal plates. The counterattack penetrated German lines, causing momentary confusion. Supply units scattered. For several hours, the advance appeared serious. Then German commanders improvised. They deployed 88 Luftwaffe anti-aircraft guns in a ground roll. The high-velocity 88s, designed to shoot down aircraft at altitude, fired horizontally at the Matildas. Armour-piercing rounds punched through the British tanks at 1,000 metres range. By evening, the counterattack stalled. Rommel reported 40 British tanks destroyed. German casualties included several hundred infantry and support troops. More significantly, the attack rattled German confidence. For the first time in the campaign, Allied armour had achieved tactical surprise. Wehrmacht intelligence reassessed British capabilities upward. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding Army Group A, began to counsel caution. Meanwhile, supply difficulties accumulated. The rapid advance stretched logistics to breaking point. Fuel trucks struggled to keep pace with panzer divisions racing westward at 30 kilometres per day. Blown bridges on French rivers delayed convoys by 12 to 36 hours. Munitions expended in the breakthrough required replenishment. Artillery batteries alone had fired tens of thousands of shells at Sedan. Engineering assets became critical. Every river crossing demanded pontoon bridges. Every destroyed road needed repair. The Channel ports, Boulogne and Calais, required siege operations to eliminate Allied defenders. The 10th Panzer Division reported 17 vehicles immobilized near the Aar Canal, mired in soft ground unsuitable for tracked movement. By May 23rd, German armour had reached the canal line west and south of Dunkirk. The British Expeditionary Force, Belgian Army, and remnants of French First Army occupied a perimeter roughly 65 kilometres long and 25 kilometres deep. German reconnaissance flights counted thousands of vehicles jamming the roads toward the coast. Luftwaffe officers estimated the enemy pocket contained 300,000 men. At Army Group A headquarters, staff officers compiled situation maps. Red arrows marked the German advance. Blue shading indicated the Allied pocket. The encirclement appeared complete. Rundstedt radioed Generaloberst Franz Halder at OKH. The enemy is trapped. Destruction is a matter of days. But the terrain inside the pocket favoured defence. The Flanders lowlands, crisscrossed by canals, dotted with towns and prone to flooding, slowed mechanized assault. British engineers opened sluice gates inundating fields. Water rose to axle depth, turning tank routes into quagmires. German infantry advancing without armour encountered stiffening resistance from British rearguards dug into villages. On the afternoon of May 23rd, Hitler departed Berlin for an unscheduled visit to Army Group A headquarters in Charleville. His staff car arrived as the sun angled toward evening. Rundstedt briefed him on the tactical situation. Armour at the canal line, infantry closing from the east, Luftwaffe in the skies. The Führer studied the maps in silence. That night, no orders issued. Panzer commanders waited for authorization to cross the canals and drive the final kilometres to Dunkirk harbour. The British Expeditionary Force, exhausted and low on ammunition, prepared for its final stand. Neither side yet knew that the next morning would bring not battle, but a pause that would change the war. The order arrived at 12:30 p.m. on May 24, 1940, typed on OKH letterhead and stamped with classification markings, Führer Directive 13 contained a single operational instruction: armoured forces are to hold present positions, further advance temporarily suspended. At forward headquarters, signals officers decoded the message and passed it to corps commanders. In panzer divisions arrayed along the Aar Canal, battalion leaders read the order with disbelief. Engines idled, crews climbed from turrets. The attack scheduled for that afternoon was cancelled. The halt applied to 3 panzer corps, 99 under Guderian, XLI and XXXX, comprising 674 operational tanks. It covered all territory west of the canal line, effectively freezing German armour 18 kilometres from Dunkirk. Infantry divisions would continue advancing from the east, but slowly on foot, without armoured support. Halder recorded the decision in his diary with barely concealed frustration. The armoured forces are to halt. The Luftwaffe will finish the enemy. Later he added, incomprehensible decision. Victory within our grasp, and we stop. The rationale cited 3 concerns. First, tank losses. Since May 10th, German armoured divisions had lost approximately 1,000 of 2,500 tanks, destroyed, damaged or broken down from mechanical failure. Panzer Mark IIIs and Mark IVs, though superior to most Allied designs, suffered from overextended operations. Track links wore out, engines required maintenance, ammunition stocks needed replenishment. Preserving armour strength for the coming drive southward against remaining French forces, full rot, case red, appeared prudent. Second, terrain. The Flanders lowlands, saturated by spring rains and deliberate flooding, impeded mechanized movement. Soft ground bogged vehicles. Narrow roads channelized advances into predictable axes. Canals and drainage ditches created natural defensive positions. Infantry, not armour, seemed better suited to close quarters fighting in such conditions. Third, Luftwaffe capability. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring had assured Hitler that air power alone could destroy the trapped enemy. The Luftwaffe commanded over 1,800 aircraft in the theatre. U-87 Stukas, He-111 and Do-17 bombers, and Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters. Against an enemy concentrated in a confined area with no room to manoeuvre, aerial bombardment promised decisive results. Rundstedt supported the halt. He had been unnerved by the Arras counterattack, which demonstrated that even a limited British thrust could disrupt German supply lines. Overextended armour without secure flanks risked sudden reversal. Better to consolidate, regroup and let the Luftwaffe and infantry complete the annihilation methodically. The decision reflected deeper considerations. Hitler sought not just tactical victory but a strategic arrangement with Britain. Total destruction of the British Expeditionary Force might harden British resolve, making peace. Negotiations impossible. Demonstrating Germany's power while offering the British an escape, humiliating but not annihilating, might encourage London to seek terms. This calculation, however nebulous, influenced the halt order. At the front, panzer crews did not know these reasons. They saw only Dunkirk's smoke on the horizon and enemy columns visible through field glasses. Fuel trucks had replenished tanks to 68% capacity. Ammunition wagons reported 74% stocks, adequate for several days of combat. Readiness was high. The order to stand fast felt inexplicable. Guderian later wrote in his memoirs, "It was utterly incomprehensible. We were in striking distance of final victory. The enemy was disorganized, his supply lines severed. One more push would have ended it. Instead, we halted." The halt lasted 48 hours. During those 2 days, May 24th and 25, the character of the campaign transformed. German initiative surrendered. British desperation converted into organized evacuation. The operational tempo, which had favoured Germany since May 10th, shifted. The pause, intended to preserve German strength, instead preserved the enemy's army. On the evening of May 24th, as German tanks sat motionless along the canal, ships began gathering on the English coast. Destroyers, minesweepers, passenger ferries, fishing trawlers and private yachts received orders to sail for Dunkirk. The Royal Navy prepared Operation Dynamo, the evacuation. The halt order had opened a window. The British intended to use it. On May 25th, as German armour remained stationary, Göring's assurance took operational form. At Luftwaffe airfields across northern France and Belgium, crews prepared for maximum effort. Flight boards listed target coordinates: Dunkirk harbour, the eastern and western moles, fuel storage tanks, rail junctions and beach assembly areas. Luftwaffe II, commanded by General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, fielded 1,822 aircraft. The strike force included Ju-87 Stukas, single-engine dive bombers famous for their screaming sirens and pinpoint accuracy, along with He-111 and Do-17 medium bombers capable of carrying payloads up to 2,000 kilograms. Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters provided escort. The operational plan called for 1,800 sorties per day. Stukas would attack the harbour infrastructure and ships at anchor. Level bombers would saturate beach areas where troops assembled for evacuation. Fighters would sweep the skies, clearing RAF resistance and strafing ground targets. Göring predicted total interdiction within 72 hours. The first raid struck on May 26th. At dawn, 50 Stukas descended on Dunkirk harbour. Bombs struck fuel storage tanks, igniting fires that sent black smoke towering thousands of metres into the air. The rail station collapsed under direct hits. Warehouses along the quays exploded. By mid-morning, much of the harbour lay in ruins, but the evacuation continued. British planners adapted quickly. Ships no longer anchored in the harbour. Instead, they manoeuvred continuously, making bombing more difficult. Smaller vessels, destroyers, minesweepers and civilian craft, operated close to the beaches, embarking troops directly from the surf. The smoke from burning oil tanks, initially a symbol of destruction, became a screen obscuring targets from Luftwaffe bombardiers. Weather complicated German plans. Overcast conditions reduced visibility to 3 to 4 kilometres on several days. Cloud ceilings dropped below optimal bombing altitude. Stukas, designed for clear weather precision strikes, proved less effective in haze and smoke. Bomber crews reported difficulty identifying targets. Many bombs fell into empty water or struck abandoned positions. RAF Fighter Command, operating from airfields in southern England, contested the airspace. Supermarine Spitfires and Hawker Hurricanes intercepted German formations before they reached Dunkirk. Although outnumbered over the battlefield, the RAF maintained a favourable kill ratio, approximately 4-3 in British favour. German losses mounted. Between May 26th and June 3rd, the Luftwaffe lost 132 aircraft destroyed and another 323 damaged. Among the losses, 28 Ju-87 Stukas, whose slow speed and fixed landing gear made them vulnerable to fighter attack. Anti-aircraft defences thickened as more ships arrived. Destroyers carried multiple 40mm Bofors guns and 50 caliber machine guns. Cruisers added heavier batteries. Massed fire from naval vessels created curtains of flak that Luftwaffe crews had to penetrate. Losses increased. The tonnage dropped proved substantial. Over 1,000 tons of high explosive between May 26th and June 3rd, but the effect on evacuation rates disappointed German planners. The Luftwaffe sank 235 vessels during the operation, primarily smaller craft, trawlers, fishing boats, barges and yachts. Larger ships, destroyers and passenger ferries proved harder to sink. 6 destroyers went down, but 39 operated throughout the evacuation. On May 27th, Göring toured forward airfields. He inspected bombed-out hangars at Dunkirk on reconnaissance photographs and expressed satisfaction with visible damage. But intelligence reports brought troubling news. Embarkation rates were increasing, not decreasing. On May 26th, the British evacuated 7,769 men. On May 27th, the number jumped to 17,804. On May 28th, it reached 47,310. Luftwaffe II's daily summaries recorded sorties flown, tonnage dropped, and ships claimed sunk. Yet the columns of enemy soldiers boarding vessels continued. The promise of decisive air interdiction, stopping the evacuation by bombardment alone, was not being fulfilled. By May 29th, German pilots reported exhaustion. Sortie rates declined from the planned 800 per day to approximately 200. Maintenance crews struggled to repair damaged aircraft fast enough. Fuel consumption outpaced supply trucks. Ammunition stocks for 20mm. Cannon, standard armament on Bf-109 fighters, ran low at several bases. Kesselring requested reinforcements. OKL, Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, the Luftwaffe High Command, diverted units from other sectors, but the reinforcements arrived slowly. Meanwhile, the evacuation ships sailed in increasing numbers. Each day that the Luftwaffe failed to stop them validated the critics who had argued that armour, not aircraft, should lead the final assault. The Luftwaffe's overconfidence had replaced Panzer divisions at the decisive moment. The substitution proved fatal. Air power alone could not close the trap that ground forces had opened. The Halt order, predicated on Göring's assurance, was costing Germany the campaign's strategic objective, destruction of the British expeditionary force. At the front lines, German infantry divisions bore the burden the halted armour had relinquished. Without tank support, infantry regiments advanced through flooded fields and fortified villages against British and French rearguards, fighting desperate delaying actions. The terrain worked against the Germans. British engineers had systematically flooded the lowlands by opening canal locks and destroying drainage pumps. Water rose to knee depth across square kilometres of farmland. Roads became the only dry routes, and British defenders zeroed artillery and machine guns on every road approach. Company logs from infantry regiments recorded the slow, costly advance. A typical day, May 25th, 3rd Company, 3rd Infantry Division. Objective, the village of Bergues, 3 kilometres from the current position. The company advanced at dawn, 2 platoons forward, 1 in reserve. At 07 hours, they encountered a Belgian machine gun position in a farmhouse, suppressing fire, flanking manoeuvre. The position fell at 09 after costing 7 German casualties. Advance resumed. At 11 hours, British artillery opened fire. Shells landed in company formation, forcing dispersal into roadside ditches filled with water. Advance halted for 2 hours until the barrage lifted. At 14 hours, the company reached the outskirts of Bergues. Entrenched British infantry, identified as elements of the 50th Division, opened rifle and machine gun fire. The village would not fall until the next day. German casualties for May 25th, 12 killed, 31 wounded. Distance gained, 3 kilometres. This pattern repeated across the entire eastern perimeter. Infantry advanced metres per hour against determined resistance, without the shock effect that armour provided. German casualties climbed. Between May 24th and May 28th, infantry divisions suffered 1,200 killed and 3,500 wounded, losses disproportionate to the tactical gains achieved. Oberst Hans von Luck, serving with the 7th Panzer Division, kept a diary during the campaign. His entry for May 25th read, "We could see the enemy boarding ships in the distance. Our tanks are fueled and ready. Orders say, hold position." Reason escapes us. Frustration is high among the men. At Panzer Regimental Headquarters, officers studied maps and waited. Fuel stock stood at 68%, adequate for 3 to 4 days of combat operations. Ammunition reserves measured 74%, hundreds of rounds per gun. Maintenance crews had completed repairs on most mechanically defective vehicles. Combat readiness exceeded 80%. Yet the armour sat idle while infantry fought alone. The halt eroded combined arms effectiveness. German doctrine emphasised coordination between tanks, infantry, artillery and air support. Armour provided breakthrough capability. Infantry secured captured ground. Artillery suppressed enemy positions. Aircraft interdicted reinforcements. Separating these elements weakened the whole. Infantry advancing without tanks lacked mobile firepower. Attacks stalled against strong points that armour could have overrun. British forces exploited the reprieve. With German armour halted, they reorganised defensive lines at Berg, Furnes, and along the canals east of Dunkirk. They emplaced anti-tank guns, registered artillery targets, and mined approach routes. Each hour of German inaction bought the defenders time to prepare. By the time the halt lifted, the tactical situation had solidified. At Army Group A headquarters, Rundstedt reviewed daily casualty reports with concern. Infantry losses were mounting without corresponding enemy collapse. Intelligence indicated the British were evacuating troops successfully despite Luftwaffe attacks. The operational plan, armour halted, infantry advancing, Luftwaffe interdicting, was not producing the expected results. On the afternoon of May 26th, Hitler authorized resuming the armoured advance, but the order took hours to disseminate through the command chain. By the time Panzer commanders received it, daylight was fading. Full-scale operations would not resume until May 27th. The 2-day pause had become a 3-day pause. When armour finally moved forward, it encountered a transformed battlefield. The defensive perimeter had contracted but hardened. British artillery, repositioned during the Halt, engaged advancing tanks at maximum range. Minefields appeared on previously open ground. Anti-tank ditches blocked direct approaches. The easy breakthrough of May 10-20 was gone. Now every kilometre would be contested. At 11:00 a.m. on May 27th, 99th Panzer Corps crossed the AR Canal. Engineers constructed pontoon bridges under sporadic artillery fire. Tanks rolled forward into the Flanders Plain. But the advance measured in hundreds of metres, not kilometres. By evening, the Corps had penetrated less than 5 kilometres. The evacuation, meanwhile, was accelerating. OKH logs for May 27th noted, "Enemy evacuation proceeding despite heavy air attack. Our forces delayed by inundations and prepared defences." The Halt order, intended to preserve German strength for future operations, had instead enabled the enemy to fortify, organise, and escape. The operational initiative, held since May 10th, was slipping away. By evening on May 27th, over 47,000 Allied troops had been evacuated. The number represented more than initial British planners had dared hope for. And the ships kept coming. Destroyers, ferries, fishing boats, yachts, an armada assembling off the coast. German artillery fired into the harbour and Luftwaffe bombers dropped their loads, but the embarkation continued. The frontline soldiers, German infantry and panzer crews alike, watched the smoke rise from Dunkirk and knew that something had gone wrong. The moment of total victory had passed, forfeited by decisions made at headquarters far from the battlefield. At 18:57 on May 26, 1940, the British Admiralty signalled Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay at Dover. Operation Dynamo is to commence. The evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk had officially begun. Ramsay commanded a hastily assembled fleet. The corps consisted of 40 destroyers, fast, heavily armed warships capable of embarking up to 900 men per voyage. Around them sailed minesweepers, anti-submarine trawlers, passenger ferries, coal-burning steamers and fishing boats. By evening of May 26th, 222 vessels were en route to Dunkirk. The port itself lay in ruins. Luftwaffe bombing had destroyed the inner harbour facilities. Warehouses smouldered, cranes lay twisted, but the eastern and western moles, long stone breakwaters extending into the channel, remained intact. These narrow piers, designed as wave barriers, now served as improvised docks. Ships tied up alongside, and troops walked aboard in single file. On the beaches east of Dunkirk, Malo-les-Bains, Bray-Dunes, La Panne, thousands of soldiers waited. They stood in long columns stretching into the surf, organised by officers who maintained order despite the chaos. Small boats ferried men from the shallows to destroyers anchored offshore. The process was slow, methodical, and vulnerable to air attack. German artillery positions southeast of Dunkirk had the harbour within range. Flak Regiment 38 deployed 105 mm and 150 mm guns on high ground near Bergs. Fire plans targeted the moles, fuel tanks and beach assembly areas. Beginning May 27th, German batteries fired approximately 300 rounds per day into the harbour. Shells struck the moles, blowing craters in the stone. Others hit ships tied alongside, holing hulls and starting fires. But the bombardment could not stop the evacuation. Ships manoeuvred constantly, minimising their time at the moles. Smoke screens generated by burning oil tanks and deliberate smoke generators obscured targets. British naval officers developed procedures. Approach at speed, tie up, embark troops in 10 minutes, depart. Exposure time determined survival. On May 27th, embarkation rates doubled. 17,804 men departed Dunkirk. On May 28th, the number reached 47,310. Each destroyer made 2 or 3 round trips per day. Smaller vessels, minesweepers and trawlers, shuttled continuously between beaches and larger ships. The operation scaled up despite German fire. the Luftwaffe intensified attacks. On May 29th, Stukas conducted 6 major raids on the harbour. Bombs struck the destroyer HMS Wakeful, which sank in 15 minutes with a heavy loss of life. The French destroyer Barrasque hit a mine and went down off Newport. Losses among smaller craft mounted. Fishing boats and yachts lacked armour and succumbed to machine gun strafing, yet the evacuation continued. For every ship sunk, 2 more arrived. The sheer number of vessels overwhelmed German interdiction capacity. Luftwaffe pilots flew multiple sorties per day, exhausting themselves and their aircraft, but could not sink ships faster than the Royal Navy dispatched them. On the ground, the perimeter contracted. By May 29th, Allied forces held a pocket 20 kilometres wide and 10 kilometres deep. German infantry divisions pressed from 3 sides, but progress remained slow. British and French rearguards, dug into villages, cellars and canal embankments, exacted a toll for every metre of ground. The German advance measured in hundreds of metres per day. At forward panzer positions, tank commanders observed the evacuation through field glasses. Columns of smoke marked burning ships. Flashes of anti-aircraft fire lit the evening sky. But the distance, still over 10 kilometres, remained beyond effective engagement range. Armour, designed for mobile warfare, sat static while the enemy escaped. Intelligence summaries arriving at OKH painted a grim picture. On May 30th, 53,923 men evacuated. May 31st, 68,014. June 1st, 64,429. The totals kept climbing. Initial British estimates had projected evacuating perhaps 45,000 men total before German forces overran the beaches. Reality exceeded expectations by multiples. By June 1st, over 200,000 troops had departed Dunkirk. The number stunned German planners. The encirclement, complete since May 23rd, had failed to prevent a mass escape. The Luftwaffe, despite dropping over 1,000 tons of ordnance, had sunk only a fraction of the evacuation fleet. The halt order's promise that air power and infantry could finish the job had proven hollow. Holder's diary entries grew increasingly bitter. May 30th. The English are escaping under our eyes. Army Group has let the opportunity slip. May 31st. Bad weather grounds the Luftwaffe. The evacuation proceeds unhindered. June 1st. Over 200,000 already evacuated. Our victory is incomplete. The infantry divisions finally reached Dunkirk's outskirts on June 2nd. By then, the beaches were nearly empty. Rear guards, primarily French units from the 12th and 32nd Divisions, held defensive positions to cover the final embarkations. They fought until their ammunition ran out, then surrendered. On June 4th, German troops entered Dunkirk harbour and raised the swastika flag. The final count, 338,226 Allied soldiers evacuated. Of these, 198,000 were British, 140,000 French and Belgian. German forces captured approximately 40,000 French soldiers who remained as rear guard. The material losses were staggering: 472 artillery pieces, 20,000 motorcycles, 65,000 vehicles, 416,000 tons of stores and ammunition, and 165,000 tons of fuel. The Allies abandoned enough equipment to outfit 10 divisions. But the men, the trained soldiers, officers and specialists who formed the British Expeditionary Force, had escaped. Britain retained an army corps. Within months, those troops would form the nucleus of divisions defending the British Isles against invasion. 4 years later, many would return to France on D-Day. The halt order had saved the BEF. Germany had won a tactical victory, seizing northern France and Belgium, but it had lost the strategic goal, annihilation of Britain's field army. The war would continue. In June 1940, as German forces turned south for Fall Rot, the final campaign against remaining French armies, Wehrmacht staff officers compiled the Dunkirk Ledger. The numbers told a story of dominance marred by incomplete execution. German casualties in the Dunkirk sector: 1,200 killed, 3,500 wounded. French casualties: approximately 35,000 captured, plus uncounted thousands killed and wounded in the fighting. British casualties: 68,000 total, including 3,500 killed and 40,000 captured. Material captured: 472 guns, 20,000 motorcycles, 65,000 vehicles, 76,000 tons of ammunition. German forces seized enough British and French equipment to refit multiple divisions. Warehouses overflowed with captured rifles, machine guns, and artillery pieces. The material victory was overwhelming, yet the human calculus defied expectations. Of the 338,226 men evacuated, Britain retained 198,000 trained soldiers. These troops, veterans of combat, familiar with German tactics, represented irreplaceable capability. Training a soldier required months. Replacing the BEF would have required years. Germany had destroyed the equipment, but preserved the enemy's army. Within weeks, recriminations began. Wehrmacht officers, in private correspondence and later memoirs, questioned the Halt order. Generalleutnant Erich von Manstein, architect of the Ardennes plan, wrote after the war, "The order to halt the armour robbed us of decisive victory. Had we pressed the attack, the British army would have been destroyed on the beaches." Guderian's memoirs echoed the sentiment. It was incomprehensible. We stood within striking distance. The enemy was disorganised. One more push would have ended it. Other officers were more circumspect, noting terrain difficulties and tank losses. But the consensus held. The pause had been unnecessary and costly. Rundstedt defended the decision. In post-war interrogations by Allied intelligence, he maintained that preserving armour for fall rot took precedence over total destruction at Dunkirk. Germany needed mechanized strength for the coming drive south against French reserves. Losing tanks in Flanders marshes would have jeopardized the next phase. The strategic calculus, he argued, justified the halt, but the strategic outcome contradicted the rationale. Full rot succeeded. France capitulated on June 22, 1940, but Britain did not sue for peace. Instead, bolstered by the preserved BEF, Britain continued the war. The army evacuated from Dunkirk formed the core of home defence forces during the threatened invasion of 1940. It trained new recruits. It provided cadres for expanding divisions. By 1944, veterans of Dunkirk led units landing at Normandy. The Halt order's political logic, avoiding total British humiliation to enable peace negotiations, also failed. Churchill's government rejected any accommodation with Nazi Germany. Britain's determination hardened rather than softened. The evacuation, portrayed in British media as a miracle, boosted national morale. Defeat transformed into defiance. Germany's operational approach revealed vulnerabilities that later campaigns would expose. Over-centralized command, with Hitler increasingly intervening in tactical decisions. Stifled initiative. The Luftwaffe's promise of decisive independent air power proved hollow. Combined arms coordination remained essential. The Halt order foreshadowed later German failures, pauses at critical moments, overestimation of single service capabilities, and strategic calculations disconnected from battlefield reality. Casualty ratios favoured Germany at Dunkirk, but numbers obscure outcomes. Germany won the battle and lost the war's trajectory. Britain lost equipment and retained capacity. The paradox defined the campaign, tactical success yielding strategic failure. Post-war assessments converged on this judgment. The US Army Historical Division, analysing the campaign in 1948, concluded, "The Halt order enabled the evacuation. German armour, halted at the moment of decision, allowed the British Expeditionary Force to escape destruction. The preservation of this force ensured Britain's continued resistance and shaped the war's duration." German military historians, writing in the 1950s and 1960s, agreed. Karl-Heinz Frieser, in his comprehensive study of the 1940 campaign, called the Halt order one of the most consequential errors of the war. Andreas Hillgruber described it as a failure of strategic vision masked by tactical triumph. The evaluation remains controversial. Some historians argue terrain and logistics justified caution. Flanders lowlands, they note, constrained armour employment. Supply lines stretched thin. Losses approaching 40% of the tank force demanded conservation. The Luftwaffe's failure was unpredictable. In earlier campaigns, air power had proven effective. The decision, though ultimately wrong, appeared reasonable given available information. But the majority verdict stands. Germany stopped when it should have pressed. The Halt order sacrificed operational momentum for strategic considerations that proved illusory. Preserving tanks for the next campaign mattered less than destroying the enemy army in the current one. The two-day pause allowed Britain to organise an evacuation that saved its military core. 4 years after Dunkirk, on June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. Among the units landing were divisions containing veterans evacuated from Dunkirk. The circle closed. The army Germany failed to destroy in 1940 returned in 1944 to liberate France. In Berlin, as the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, captured German documents filled Allied archives. Among them, the original Führer Directive 13, the Halt order, dated May 24, 1940. The typed text remains clear, its consequences now history. 18 kilometres from Dunkirk, German armour stopped. The decision preserved an enemy that would not be preserved again. Between May 24 and June 4, 1940, Germany destroyed most Allied equipment in the Flanders pocket, but failed to destroy the British Expeditionary Force. That failure, born of caution at the moment of triumph, ensured the war would continue. It demonstrated that industrial democracies, given time and space, could recover from battlefield defeats. It proved that wars are decided not by single campaigns, but by cumulative strategic choices. The equipment abandoned at Dunkirk filled German warehouses. The soldiers who escaped rebuilt British divisions. The gap between those two outcomes defined the campaign's meaning. Germany won the battle, but Britain, by preserving its army, retained the capacity to fight another day. That capacity, sustained through the dark years of 1940-1942, eventually turned the tide. The Halt order's shadow stretched across the entire war. Dunkirk remains a case study in how operational pauses at decisive moments can invert strategic results. The most advanced army in Europe, poised for total victory, stopped. The evacuation that followed became one of history's most consequential escapes. The question posed at the beginning, why did Germany stop, has many answers, but the result admits no ambiguity. The Halt order saved the British Expeditionary Force and changed the war.